Hello. I was recently sent this gorgeous copy of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, Lustria, so I thought I would take some time to explore what's in it and share my thoughts about it. I'm Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and today I'm reviewing Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, Lustria. Lustria is the latest sourcebook released by Cubicle 7 for their 4th edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and it goes into great detail about the most dangerous continent in the Warhammer world, giving GMs plenty of options and ideas for setting their campaigns in jungles and on the coasts of this wondrous and ancient place. The book has been available digitally since late last year, and you can now buy it physically in either a regular or a collector's edition. I really quite like it, and I'm going to talk about why in just a moment, but before I get into my thoughts on it, I just wanted to share a couple of quick caveats. Number one is that this edition I've got right here, the collector's edition, was sent to me by Cubicle 7, and if you've watched the channel, you'll know that I've done a couple of interviews with the people who work there and who worked on this book. Now, there has never been any expectation or pressure from Cubicle 7 for me to do anything other than share my honest thoughts about the book. And that's exactly what I will be doing, but I just wanted to be upfront about that relationship as well. And number two is that, unfortunately, so far, I've not had a chance to actually play with the contents of this book. So I have formed my thoughts based on reading it and exploring it and spending time with its contents. I really do want to play with it as soon as I can, but as you know, it's always tough to get friends around the table. I am looking forward to trying this out in real life though, but for now, it's just on my read-through that I'm sharing my initial thoughts. Lustria itself has long been a continent in search of content. Back in the first edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, Richard Halliwell, one of the creators of Warhammer, actually wrote a full manuscript for a Lustria book that ultimately never got published. And whilst the home of the Lizardmen turned up in plenty of references in the fiction, and of course became the backdrop for the Lizardmen army from Warhammer Fantasy Battles 5th edition, it hasn't previously been explored in deep detail for the role-playing game. With recent sourcebooks on the Sea of Claws and Salzamund, the Empire Port City, and the announcement that there's going to be a new edition of Marienburg at some point in the future, which I cannot wait for, very excited about that, it's perhaps no surprise that the Cubicle 7 team have been looking for other corners of the Warhammer known world to explore. They've been spending a lot of time giving PCs ships and crews and opportunities to get out on the high seas, so now they've got to give them destinations as well. And Lustria, given that it's so different to the old world, really does pose an interesting and intriguing prospect for campaign play and for further exploration. This makes perfect sense as a supplement, and it's timed really well. Far from the shores of the old world, across the great ocean, is the mysterious continent of Lustria. Tales tell of troves of golden treasure and repositories of arcane lore, ready for the taking by those bold enough to risk it. Each week, it seems that another ship full of hopeful adventurers departs to this new world on a voyage of exploration. So the reason for this book existing makes perfect sense, and what I was hoping the book would do, and it actually has done, is not just focus on Lizardmen and make this into some sort of faction-specific book, but really focus on the continent itself. How can you use Lustria as a setting for adventures? How can you create campaigns that explore this land? Of course, there's a natural draw with this kind of place, with ancient temples and totally unknown denizens of this jungle space. It would be very easy to turn that into just another sort of dungeon diving game, where every single adventure is spent finding some ruins, going through some traps, and then like rifling through all of the treasure at the bottom of the dungeon. But that's not what this book is at all. This is a really well-considered exploration of the societies that are based in Lustria. So the Lizardmen and all of the other creatures and races. Martha's just having a stretch. All of the other factions and forces that you can find in Lustria and dotted around it, and how they all work together and against each other and where players can fit in amongst them. Now, that's not to say that there isn't loads of great Lizardmen content, because there really is. There is history and lore and locations and plot hooks, there are enemies and there are allies. There are even rules for running skink player characters, which are interesting, but I can only imagine would take some incredibly lateral thinking to comfortably work into a campaign of WFRP. But it's a fun idea nonetheless. There's a lot of stuff here that you would recognise from the Lizardman army in fantasy battles, but brought to life in a way that makes them usable in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. These are not just units on the battlefield, these are characters and creatures, I suppose, that you could interact with both as an enemy to fight, but also an ally to enlist, or an NPC with which to parlay. It's lots of cool stuff here around the Lizardmen and the Slann, which is really great because it just gives you a completely different suite of options, a new bestiary, a new set of things to challenge your players with and to throw at them. Completely different to what we would encounter in a traditional old world campaign. But then, as I say, the breadth of options I really like are that there are other factions here too. So we've seen stuff about this in Fantasy Battles, in White Dwarf, in all of the lore books for Warhammer Fantasy over the years, and they are really drilled into here to create workable factions. The Vampire Coast and the Skaven who are out here in Lustria, they get some really terrific love. There is some great material on Luther Harkon and his swampy pirate zombies, the feverous followers of the Skaven clan Pestilence, and even the secretive outpost of the High Elves, the Citadel of Dusk. It means that you can really bring these factions and their dynamics to the table in lots of interesting ways. More detail on things like Luther Harkon and his fraught alliance with the ethereal Brine Wife, who he betrayed during her lifetime, and really inspire me with instant ideas for campaigns and adventures. And Cubicle 7 do some great work with how they position these factions throughout. Take the High Elves, for instance. We get the history of their presence, followed by reasons that the PCs might be interacting with them at all, NPCs, an overview of how they operate and where they live in Lustria, and information on their relationships with other local powers. And scattered throughout the section, as well as throughout the book in fact, are these brief plot hooks that offer up cool ideas for an adventure or a campaign or just some backstory that you might want to drop into your game. It's an approach that really appeals to me because it kind of turns the sourcebook into this big toolbox that has lots of different options in it that I can grab and cherry pick and just kind of go, oh, I want that, but I want to reuse it in this way, or I want to adapt it, or I want to drop it in whole cloth from the actual toolbox into my game and then see how things work out. So lots of options, and that's, as a GM, that is absolutely what I'm all about. I really, really enjoy that. At this point in WFRP 4th edition's life cycle, it probably goes without saying that the book itself is beautifully put together. The collector's edition, much like the Winds of Magic and Imperial Zoo special editions, has a sort of leatherized cover and really nice thick glossy pages, and it's also got gilded page edges, which is really nice. It looks lovely on the shelf. And then inside both versions of the book, there is just a ton of gorgeous artwork. Some may be familiar from other GW products over the years, but all of it is well chosen and really well placed. In fact, the graphic design is top-notch. It's clear and compelling, and I think it flows really well. Even with the abundance of callouts and extra details and tables that add value in the book, there is a delicate art to drawing the eye to key details or ideas without overwhelming or unduly distracting the reader as you progress through it. I think it gets that balance bang on. And something else that I quite like about the way the book has been approached is that things we know of Lustria from other editions of Warhammer Fantasy Battles and references here and there in WFRP and other places as well, things like Skeggi and the Ziggurat of Doom or Ziggurat of Dawn, they are present here as well. They were in fact part of the earliest lore for Warhammer Fantasy, right back at the very beginning in some of those scenarios. So it is great to see that find its way into this book and to really be explored and expanded in a way that makes it useful in the game. Skeggi, the Norse settlement, is given loads of great detail. It's a really good setting, a sort of landing point and a starting point for a campaign or a series of adventures set in Lustria with loads of options, loads of plot hooks, loads of characters. It's a really good way of sort of creating a workable location out of something that's more often just referenced in lore and kind of not given a lot of flesh on the bones. Here, it's a place that we can visit and we can use in our games. So I'm very impressed by that. I really like that as an approach, and the level of detail is really, really good. And I guess that is mostly my sort of conclusion, really. If you're looking for a book that has a whole host of options, that gives you loads of potential avenues to explore new and different adventures, to encounter different spins on races and factions and characters that we've seen before elsewhere in WFRP, but under a sort of different guise and with different agendas and different politics and different stuff going on, this book has that in spades. Lustria itself comes across really well. This is a rich and vibrant world in which to spend some time and some adventures that will be very, very dangerous. I mean, there's loads of flora and fauna, very deadly stuff, maladies that can affect all of your PCs and that can cause all kinds of problems. There's loads of great stuff like that. Lots and lots of challenges that you can throw at your players in pretty much any way you want. And I think that that's fantastic. Whether that is for a one-off adventure where you just happen to end up in Lustria, or if you want to set a whole campaign, there's plenty of material here to work with to build out all of those connections, all of those stories, all of those NPCs and different elements, and how you might want to progress with it. They've even put 3 short adventures at the back of the book so that you can get started with a couple of just straight up, relatively simple scenarios, but that show you what it's like to adventure in Lustria. So, for me, this has got everything I would want. If I'm about to set a campaign in Lustria or an adventure, this book has everything I need. And to be honest, I'm very excited for future scenarios and supplements that follow this approach for other corners of the Warhammer world that haven't had as much detail and hasn't as much light cast on them as we might like. So I am hoping that when we get books about the High Elves and Ulthuan, and when we get some more stuff about Dark Elves or the Dwarves and stuff like that, if they take this approach, give us a huge toolkit of potential options, and show us lots of really exciting and interesting stuff that we can take and sort of put together in whatever form we want in our adventures, then I think we will have a lot of very exciting supplements on the way. So, for my money, this is a really fun supplement. It is really different to WFRP traditionally and the old world and those kind of campaigns. Lustria, by its very nature, is a very different place, and you have a completely different approach to the politics and the type of adventures you're probably going to play. But I think there's lots of stuff here to find and to enjoy if you're open to that kind of game. So there is my review of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th Edition's Lustria Sourcebook from Cubicle 7. Thank you once again to Cubicle 7 for sending me a copy. I really enjoyed spending time with it and exploring those dangerous Lustrian jungles. I would love to know if this review was helpful to you in better understanding the Lustria product and the book. Do you want to see more of this kind of thing? And do you want to see me approach reviews in this way? Do you want the vibes of a product like I've given here, the overview and how it made me feel and what I liked about it? Or do you want more specific detail? Do you want to know specific rules and sections and that kind of stuff? It would really help me out if you could leave a comment down below and just let me know if this was useful, I guess, and what you would like to see for reviews of RPGs and games products in the future. I will be releasing on the channel soon a history of Lustria as a concept in Warhammer lore and the games over the years. How has it developed and evolved from those earliest scenarios in Warhammer Fantasy Battle all the way to this dedicated WFRP sourcebook that's just been released? So that video is coming soon. Keep your eye on the channel and hopefully you'll see it drop relatively quickly. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Jordan and this is Jordan Sorcery.